Welcome to episode 7 of Tales of the Ultimate Sportsman. I'm Jon Hedin, your host. This episode is 5 hunting stories from around the world. Please let us know what you think of them in the comments. And if you have a story you want to tell the rest of the world, head over to ultimatesportsman.com. Alright then, until next episode, take care and have fun out there. Till next time.
Bear Scare in California by Stephen R. Lewis. Hesperia, California. The beginning. With my truck completely packed, I began my trip at 4:30 in the morning. I had anxiously been awaiting this day for quite some time. A 5-hour trip, and I would be reunited with my hunting buddies. This year we are in a new area for opening deer season, but 2 of our hunters have scouted the area and have hunted here before. After what seemed like 10 hours, I rolled into camp just short of 5 hours. After hellos and handshakes, I unpacked my truck and set up my cot and gear in a large wall tent that was already set up. There was still hot coffee on the wood-burning stove and some leftover breakfast food, to which I quickly indulged in. After eating, we began to discuss our hunting plans and decided to do some scouting first, since we arrived 3 days before opening day. We spent the rest of the day scouting and gathering firewood. The next morning we awoke at first light and began scouting again. We were amazed at the amount of deer tracks that we were finding. Surely this would be a successful hunt. Back at camp by 10 o'clock, we cooked up some breakfast and talked about where we would hunt opening morning. We took a short drive around noon and spotted a bear and her cub crossing the road. She stopped as we did too, stared for a few seconds, and then continued on into the woods. I have always been told that bears are just as scared of you as you are of them, but don't ever get between a mother and her cub or she may attack. Once they disappeared, we continued back to camp. Relaxing at camp, we heard several horses coming up the dirt road, which was adjacent to our campsite. It turned out to be a professional cowboy who was returning from packing and supplies to a party that was 10 miles into the woods. One of our hunters knew this cowboy, who happened to be the son of a famous retired baseball player and now a commentator. So he stopped into our camp. After introductions were complete, he accepted a cold drink and informed us that he had seen several deer in the area and it should be excellent deer hunting. However, there was some bad news that went along with it. The park system had relocated 22 problem bears from Yosemite and dropped them off in our immediate area. We all looked at each other in disbelief and couldn't believe what we were just told. What seemed to be a perfect season was now tarnished with a bear problem and possible threat to our success. We discussed our plans for opening day again and decided we wouldn't change anything yet. Opening day. With a 4 a.m. wake-up, we all arose from our sleeping bags, got dressed, made coffee, and rechecked our gear. We wanted to be in our hunting spots. Well before first light, the morning hunt was uneventful, and we all returned to camp for lunch. We exchanged information and decided on an early afternoon hunt to see if there was any midday activity. At 3:30 p.m., a shot was fired. One of our hunters had shot a nice 2x2, forked horn. We gutted him on the spot and then drug him to the truck, which took about an hour. We had already prepared a meat pole, so we quickly had him skinned and bagged. We were all quite proud as we now had one hanging. Day 2. Again we set out early with high hopes. At about 9:30 a.m., my partner and I started to move down the side of a hill which was heavily wooded, staying abreast of each other at about 100 feet. We arrived at the bottom, where a dry creek bed was filled with brush. We decided to sit and glass this area for a while. We moved further apart to cover more area. Within 10 minutes, my partner fired a shot. He yelled that he had one down. I quickly moved towards his position. He had already started moving in the direction of the buck. I arrived only minutes after he did. There lay the biggest 3x4 I have ever seen in this part of California. Once again, we gutted on the spot and took it back to camp. We sat in awe, as now there were 2 hanging. The rest of the day was unfruitful. The bear encounter. With the same morning ritual, we were off to what surely would be a successful 3rd day of hunting. I had positioned myself behind a fallen tree, which provided excellent concealment as well as a great rest for my rifle. The wind was to my face, and I had almost a 180-degree field of view. I was quite confident that today was my day for bragging rights. After 2 hours of no activity, I decided to move to another area just a few hundred yards away. I reached this spot and continued to glass the area. I was standing in a small thicket of trees that helped to conceal my position. After about 10 minutes, I heard loud crunching noises coming from my left front. I knew that this was not a deer. It had to be a bear. I quickly weighed my options. Sit still and hope it doesn't come towards me, or make some noise to let it know that I'm there in hopes that it will scurry away. Before I could make up my mind, the bear passed by me at 40 feet and didn't even look my way. It was a brown bear that weighed around 250 pounds. Within 15 seconds, another bear appeared following the first one. This bear was huge and much darker. I would guess him to weigh 450 to 500 pounds. I froze with fright, but he too passed without noticing me. Feeling relieved, I turned in the opposite direction for a moment and then back, and was staring at a bear, face to face, at 25 feet. He was on all fours directly facing me. I knew not to do anything drastic, so I just stood there hoping the bear would see that I was not a threat and leave. He lunged 2 steps toward me and stopped. I was shaking with fear and slowly removed my rifle from my shoulder. Again, he lunged a couple of steps toward me. I dropped to a kneeling position and sighted it on him, and then yelled as a last resort to scare him away. It didn't work. Instead, he charged me at full pace, and at about 15 feet, I pulled the trigger. The bear immediately turned 90 degrees and ran away. I thought to myself, did I hit or miss him? He was so close I couldn't have missed, but he did run away. I then thought of the old cliche that says, if you're going to shoot a bear, make sure you kill it because there's nothing more dangerous than a wounded bear. My fright level had now peaked, and all I could think about was this bear or possibly bears coming back. I moved to an area that provided a clear view in 360 degrees and stayed there for an hour before I felt safe to move. I returned to Fallen Tree, where I was at earlier, and decided to finish the morning hunt there. Not even 30 minutes had passed when I spotted another bear with her cub. I'm sure that it is the same pair we saw before opening day. They were about 150 to 200 feet from my position. I felt quite safe being that far away, that is, until they started to move in my direction. Slowly working their way up the hill, I became as frightened as the first encounter. I decided to stay behind a log and hope that they would stay clear of me. The last thing I wanted to do was to shoot a bear that had a cub, but if it came down to survival, I would. Fortunately, the two changed their direction and moved well away from me. Deciding that I had had enough excitement for the morning, I began to hike back to the truck. I reversed my course and walked back out the same way that I had walked in. I was quite shocked when I noticed bear tracks on top of my boot prints. These bears had either followed my scent or were just passing through woods the same way I did. I became distinctly aware of my surroundings as I continued back to the truck. Once there, I felt secure and relieved. Within the hour, 2 of my hunting partners returned to the truck. I wasted no time informing them of my bear encounters. We returned to camp. The remaining days, due to my frightening encounter with the bears, we decided to hunt in pairs without leaving the other's sight. We were also not so eager to walk into the woods before it got light. The remaining days of our hunt proved unsuccessful, and after 10 days we broke camp, said our goodbyes, and returned to our homes. I learned a valuable lesson on this hunting trip. The old adage that bears will leave you alone if you don't bother them is not always true. I can't speak for my hunting buddies, but as for me, I now have a greater respect for that fur-bearing animal that appears on our California state flag.
How to Shoot a Lion by Jon Hedin, Wyoming, Minnesota. A few years back, I was doing some work for a doctor in Minnetonka, Minnesota. As I walked around his home, I couldn't help but notice that he had one of just about every huntable animal in the world in his collection. They were hanging from the walls, the ceiling, and standing on the floor everywhere. I asked him about the lion's head above the fireplace, and just like that, the 80-year-old man started telling me his story. First of all, he explained, you need a guide, someone who's done it before and is good at it. The guide goes out and finds out where the lions have been feeding. Then the guide finds a small 30-foot by 30-foot clearing in the jungle close by, where he cuts one himself. He also builds a platform 20 feet up in a tree and outfits it with spotlights. Then you need an ox, a big one, for a bait that you tie to a stake in the middle of the clearing. So the doctor and his guide were up in the tree stand above the clearing, staying perfectly quiet. With the lion's keen sense of smell, you couldn't smoke or eat anything with a scent. About 3 o'clock in the morning, he felt the guide's elbow smack into his arm, and it woke him up. The ox was pacing back and forth nervously when a big growl came from the jungle straight ahead of them. A minute later, the big oxen screamed a sound that Doc had never before heard come from any animal. The guide slapped the switch for the spotlights and said, "Shoot, Bwana, shoot." Doc said he looked down and couldn't believe what he was seeing. The huge male lion was on top of the oxen's back with all 4 sets of claws stuck deep into its hide. With one swat his right front paw, he almost took the oxen's head off. The oxen fell to the ground and didn't move again. Doc lifted his gun and shot, and kept shooting till the lion ran back into the dark cover of the jungle. He wasn't sure how many shots he had got off, or if he had hit him or not. It had all happened so fast. Doc, excited to start tracking, turned to go down the ladder, but the guide stopped him. "We wait for light," he said. Light came 3 long hours later. Once on the ground, they found a blood trail. The guide and Doc slowly tracked the lion for 500 yards, listening and looking, finding a blood drop here and there, not knowing if the lion was dead or just wounded. Then they came around a bend in the trail, and there he was, not moving at all, one bullet into his back, through his heart and back out his chest. The doctor finished telling his story to me by slowly petting the lion on his head and said, "Back then, in those days, it was cool to shoot a lion."
Bullwinkle and Bull-Headed Bill by Chaplain Knox Herndon, Fayetteville, Georgia. I am the chaplain for North Country River Charters, NCRC, which is a wonderful Alaskan hunting and fishing outfitter group working out of Fairbanks, Alaska. As chaplain for the organization, I have hunted moose and black bear with Bill O'Halloran, the owner, for several years. I go up each year from Atlanta and try, as my God-given duty, to attempt to keep these crazy guys straight and minister to the clients that hunt each year. This particular year, Bill and I were hunting in a wonderful place we call the Cow Pond, due to the many moose we see there each year. One season we counted 17 cows and calves in a 10-day period. I have hunted moose and bear now for 7 years and feel that Bill and I have acquired a very unique way to call on a bull. We use a double-team approach. I rake the trees with my moose bone shoulder blade, and Bill does a special 4-mile deep-throated grunt. After a while we switch, and I call, and Bill does a special rake the trees and tear up the area routine, just like a rutting, angry, charging bull would do. We were just about to start our little double-team calling approach when Bill looked at me with that 40 mission stare and said, "Our bull will step out right there." Now, to my knowledge, Bill is neither prophet nor the son of a prophet, nor has he before or since ever said this to me. So we began our little double-team serenade for about 30 minutes when all of a sudden, from the exact spot Bill had predicted, out jumped Bullwinkle waving his 53-inch rack from side to side. As he broke out of the woodline, he let out a grunt that, translated in any language, said, "Let's fight now." Bill turned to me and ordered, "Shoot him now." I raised my .338 Ruger and fired a well-placed shot into heart and lung area. Bullwinkle lowered his head and laid his ears back and headed right for the pond and us. Brother Bill jumped out in front of this charging, swaying Bull with his arms waving in the air, and hollered like mad to keep him out of the water. It was about at this time that I was trying to remember how many sets of clean underwear I had back in camp. Bill got the bull turned around and, as he reached the preferred high ground spot at the tree line, instructed me to shoot him again. I shot again, and he fell right where Bill wanted him. I later questioned Bill as to how in the world he knew where Bullwinkle would break out of the woodline. He looked at me with that same 40 mission stare and said, "Knox, if I told you, I would have to kill you." I never asked him again. A true story. I have spent many nights around our Alaskan moose campfires and have watched the northern lights dance through the Arctic sky. These have been some of the greatest moments of my life.
Big Step for a Little Man by Dave Horvath. Alberta, Canada. Being raised in the big city of Calgary, Canada, until I was 5, then moving to northern Alberta to farm was a bit of a culture shock, but I looked forward to exploring my new playground. It was just like the television show Green Acres. After a couple of years of tagging along after my dad and uncles, I was convinced that I had the wilderness savvy to tackle just about anything. The lake that was about 7 miles from my home fascinated me. I had heard of the sky being black with waterfowl and had seen hunters come back from the lake area with moose as big as elephants. One day, I was going to go into the deepest, darkest bush known to man, and what an adventure it would be. I spent the whole winter dreaming of the pile of game I would come back with. One Easter, my parents announced that we were all going to Calgary for a visit. I somehow convinced them to let me stay behind to take care of the farm. The day they left, I started to make preparations for the trip of a lifetime. A sack of grub, matches, and my pocket knife. What else would I possibly need? I fired up the old tractor and headed out, only to find that even a tractor can only go so far in the mud. By the time I reached the area I believed the lake to be in, the sun was coming up and my legs were sore. The tractor wheels had plugged up a few miles back. Hearing the geese honking, I stumbled on heading straight east. I figured that if I followed the sun, I couldn't go wrong. Suddenly, there was the lake dead ahead. The sky was black with geese, and a pair of moose was munching on willows at the far end of the lake. I quickly scared off the geese and the moose with a couple of wild shots, then, disappointed, ate my lunch and settled in for a nap. When I woke up, the weather had turned bad. The sun was gone, and it was getting late, so I thought I'd better head back to the tractor and home. After walking for an hour, I again heard geese and was amazed that I was back at the lake again. How did that happen? I kept trying to get my bearings, but after ripping my rubber boots on ice and getting a branch in my eye, I was horrified to hear the geese again. No way, not the lake again. I climbed a large spruce, and, sure enough, there was the lake about a half-mile in front of me. That was it. I thought I was finished. I thought about my parents finding my frozen body out here and began to panic. Sitting there, I started to think about the hunter training course that my father had me take a year before. I remember the instructor saying, "Sit and wait for help if I were ever lost in the woods." I decided that that advice was no good in my situation because it would be days before I was found missing. I pondered some more, then remembered a speech on wilderness travel where the trainer had said, "Your strongest leg takes a bigger step than your less used leg." That was it. That's why I was walking in circles. Again, I left the lake, taking a hard left every 10 minutes or so to make up for my more powerful right leg. I ventured toward what I hoped was home. It worked. I was out, though not exactly where I wanted to be, but I knew the way home. After sleeping the entire next day, I felt okay and only told of my adventure years later. My parents were mad, but realized that I knew how lucky I was to get out okay. My son is now 8 years old, and I plan to enroll him in a survival course. I want him to walk a mile in my boots, straight ahead and a little to the right.
Look Out, Here He Comes, by Tim Worel. Hasty, Minnesota. I was bow hunting in northwestern Minnesota, and the rut was in full swing. I got to the public hunting area a little late. There were about 1.5 hours of light left, and I figured that I could scope out a good spot to put my portable stand for hunting the next morning. Last year, I had found an old wood stand in a small woods by a swamp that would do for tonight. I was walking across an open grass field with a slight wind in my face as I headed up a small hill. When I got to the top, I spotted 2 does by the old stand that I was planning on hunting from. I got down on my knees and was about 100 yards from them in the open field. There was a slight hill that was hiding me. I thought that maybe there was a buck with them, so I pulled my grunt out and grunted twice. I was right. a nice buck came charging out of the woods. He went about 20 yards and stopped. You could see that he was not happy that another buck was in his territory. The steam was coming off his neck, and he was stomping around looking for the deer that was grunting. He started to run straight at me. He got about 50 yards from me and stopped. He looked mad. He stood there for a couple minutes and then turned and started walking back toward the does. I'm sure that if he could talk, he would be saying, "These are my does. Don't even think about it." I said to myself, "Oh, yeah?" I grunted again, and the buck turned and started to run straight at me again. When he got about 20 yards from me, I sat up on my knees and pulled my bow back. When the buck saw me, I think he thought that I was a deer. He kept coming at me. I started to shake. When the buck got 7 feet from me, he noticed what I was. He turned as I shot, and the arrow went right under his chest. I couldn't believe that I had missed at only 7 feet. The buck ran a little ways and circled back to his does. The does had been watching the whole time. When he got to the does, I grunted a couple times, and he stopped. I'm sure the buck could talk. He would say, "You're lucky that you're not a deer." He turned and ran off into the swamp with his does and was soon out of sight.
Well, that's it for episode 7. From all of us at Tales of the Ultimate Sportsman. Have fun, but be careful out there. Till next time.